Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. We will be covering lean portfolio management, practical patterns for amplifying the impact of SAFE. We're joined today from our friends at Scaled Agile. We're very lucky to have them. Thank you all for joining. Now, just a few things to mention before we get started. You can hear us, but we cannot hear you, obviously, but you can make yourself heard during this webinar. There should be a questions panel on your GoToWebinar screen, which you can use to ask questions at any point during this webinar if a question comes to your mind, and we'll have a designated session at the end in which our presenters today will read a question aloud and then answer it together for all to hear. And then also, we are recording today's webinar, and everyone who registered will be sent a link to view the recording later on. So if you need to leave early for any reason, just know that you will receive a recording later on. Now, just a few tidbits about Quint before we jump into the content today. We're founding members of the Lean IT Association, DASA, also down the sort of Lean Agile track as well. We've also been selected as the world's best outsourcing advisor for several years in a row now in helping companies, restructure their, IT departments, for example. And we are where you are. We have over 200 consultants that deliver projects in over 49 countries around the world. And these are the 8 key areas in which we help our clients. We help them with their digital strategy and transformation, lean, agile, DevOps, like we're talking about today, data management, transformational leadership with their sourcing strategy and benchmarking, governance, risk, and compliance, their SIEM, service integration and management, and last off, of course, training and coaching, like with SAFE classes, for example. And without any further ado, I'm going to hand things over today to our first presenter, which is our friend from Scaled Agile, Andrew Sales. Andrew, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks, Alex, and welcome everyone to the webinar. Just a quick overview of what we're going to cover. We'll start by looking at some of the key responsibilities of lean portfolio management, share some techniques around defining a vision, establishing flow, putting in place some lean budgeting practices. And then in the second half of the webinar, Kevin will cover some real-world implementation strategies and share a case study with you. So perhaps a good place to start is just by thinking about the bigger picture and thinking about the question of why is it that so many organizations are currently undergoing transformations to change their ways of working. And really the goal that they're aspiring to is to become a lean enterprise. And by that, we mean one that is able to thrive on digital disruption, one that can be responsive to change, and one that's able to deliver value to their customers at the speed that they demand. And one solution to these challenges is the Scaled Agile framework. It's currently the leading framework for enterprise agility, and it brings together principles and practices across a number of bodies of knowledge, lean, agile, and DevOps. And all of the information within the framework is freely available simply by visiting the website. And also there you can find case studies where organizations have shared their implementation journeys and also some of the business results that they've achieved. Now, one view we like to take of the Scaled Agile framework is via the big picture. And this really acts as a visual guide to the framework itself. If you visit the website, you'll see the SAFE big picture. And behind each of these icons, you'll be able to access further information and articles to help support your SAFE journeys. In addition to these principles and practices, though, SAFE also describes 5 core competencies. So what are the 5 core competencies of a lean enterprise? And you see these as the circles at the bottom and up the right-hand side, starting, of course, with lean agile leadership, which is about leading the change, empowering the teams within the organization to embrace these new ways of working. Then we have team and technical agility, which is our cross-functional agile teams, focusing on technical practices to make sure we're building quality in at every step of the way. And then as we go up, we start thinking about DevOps, release on demand. How can we build a continuous delivery pipeline to ensure we can release when our customers and the business demand it? And then for the biggest solution builders, we have the business solutions and lean systems competency, which is really about how we can maintain agility when we're operating with hundreds and thousands of practitioners. And then, of course, the topic for today, lean portfolio management. And perhaps as we start thinking about what we mean by lean portfolio management, the first important consideration is how do we organize ourselves? We know that lean agile methods focus relentlessly on the goal of accelerating value delivery. And the first step in that is to identify and understand how value actually flows through the organization. Once we do that, we can then look to optimize that flow. And this is the picture that I think most of us are familiar with. Traditional approaches to organizational structures tend to optimize for skills, for management efficiencies, and therefore we're generally organized around different functional areas. In contrast, when we think about how value flows, it tends to flow across these silos. And in particular, as our products and solutions get more complex, the handoffs and communication that is required also gets more complex. And so for the reasons shown on this slide, this way of organizing is not conducive to improving and managing flow. SAFe takes a different approach to organization. In SAFe, we like to think about value streams, and value streams are simply all the steps needed, including the people, the systems, the information, everything required to deliver value to our customers or to the business. And the value here could be developing and deploying new solutions. It could be maintaining a set of products. It might even be developing and providing a set of services. But organizing around value in this way is going to produce substantial benefits. We're going to be able to generate faster learning in terms of what is working well. We're going to be able to shorten our time to market, improve quality, improve productivity. And as we'll see towards the end of this webinar, this way of thinking about organization is also going to allow us to put in place a much more leaner approach to budgeting. Now, one thing to keep in mind when we're thinking about bringing all the people involved in the creation and delivery of value together is that it's very likely they're going to be distributed across the organization. In fact, not only will they likely be distributed across functional boundaries, but in most cases, they'll be distributed geographically as well. And in SAFe, what we're talking about when we think about organizing around value is to create a virtual organization. We're not necessitating the changing of the organizational hierarchy, but rather we're identifying and bringing together the people who need to work together. So now that we have that context of organizing around value, we can provide a bit more clarity around what we mean when we define a SAFe portfolio. A SAFe portfolio is the mechanism by which we fund and govern those identified value streams. In terms of the scope, when we think about the portfolio, if we're considering small to mid-size organizations, this portfolio may indeed be equated with the entire organization itself. And it may contain and govern all the value streams across all the solutions that this organization is developing and delivering. But in larger organizations, what we're seeing is that the SAFe portfolio is often closer to a line of business. And in that sense, the enterprise will contain a number of SAFe portfolios. So for example, if we think about telco, we might have a SAFe portfolio focused on cloud IT. We might have one focused on all the value streams related to their mobile solutions. Finance, we might have portfolios around insurance, mortgages, and investments. Perhaps if we're working for an education company, we have one around their higher education solutions, one around their qualifications business. And then, of course, within a particular portfolio, if we take the insurance example, we can imagine value streams around solutions related to home insurance, another value stream related to the car insurance solutions, and maybe one for the travel insurance solutions. The whole point of the SAFe portfolio is that it provides strategic alignment across these value streams. It governs the investment, the budgets, and when necessary, provides a level of cross-value stream coordination. And of course, it takes responsibility for improving some of the larger initiatives that the organization will be working on. Once this portfolio is in place, the next critical step is to think about some of the responsibilities of the lean portfolio management team themselves. And if we think about the SAFe 4 core values, one of the core values is alignment. And alignment to a common goal is absolutely critical for being able to decentralize decision-making and speed up execution. Unfortunately, many times the challenge presented on this slide by Jeffrey Moore is that we often don't have alignment around some of these strategic goals. And as Jeffrey Moore says here, many strategy dialogues end up with executives talking at cross purposes because nobody knows exactly what is meant by vision and strategy, and no two people ever quite agree on which topics belong where. And Geoffrey Moore identifies the lack of good business discipline as one of the contributing factors to this situation. What I want to take you through now is some of the steps that SAFE recommends to put this disciplined approach in place to help manage this endeavor and ensure we can build alignment across the organization. So the first step for the lean portfolio management team to take is to define a set of strategic themes. And these will be our differentiating business objectives that are really going to provide our focus for the next 1 to 3 to 5 years. And you can see some examples on this slide. Appeal to a younger demographic, reduce some of our warehousing overheads by 50%. Not only that, they also act to ensure that this particular portfolio is connected to the wider enterprise strategy. And these strategic themes will arise out of a collaboration between lean portfolio management and wider enterprise executive teams. And they're going to provide the critical context for all the decision making that we're doing around the portfolio vision, around the budget, around some of the big initiatives that we're approving as well. Now, once we have a clear understanding of the strategic themes, the next step is to really define the portfolio domain and its associated business case. And what you're looking at on this slide is the portfolio canvas. And this is an adaptation of the business model canvas that I suspect a lot of people are familiar with. And this is a way that we can capture and define more clearly the business model associated with this portfolio. So starting at the top row, for every value stream that the portfolio governs, we specify that value stream. We make it very clear which solutions it is delivering, which customer segments it services, and what are the channels to market. And if there are any particular customer relationships that it maintains, we can call those out as well. And then, of course, for every value stream, we need to know how much money is being allocated and how are we going to judge success? What are the KPIs for that particular value stream? And then the bottom two rows are common to the entire portfolio itself. Who are our key partners, our key suppliers? What are the key activities we use to govern and operate? What are some of the key resources and stakeholders we need to call upon to make sure that we're governing and executing successfully? And then what's the cost structure? What is the budget? Are there any constraints on how we need to allocate the costs? What are some of our operating overheads? And of course, finally, what are the revenue streams? What money are we bringing in that we can reallocate during our budgeting processes? So the real objective here is to provide complete transparency and alignment to get a shared understanding and really try and take a systems thinking approach to portfolio management. Now, one critical role for the lean portfolio management team is to really balance core business activities as well as build a plan for the future. And the 3 horizons of growth model is from the book, The Alchemy of Growth. And this provides a nice structure for enterprises to start thinking about how they can manage their investments without neglecting performance in one particular area. And SAFE has extended this model slightly, and it's that extended version that you can see on this slide. If we start from the left, the Horizon 3 activities, these are our investments in investigating potential solutions for the future. So they're things like research projects, pilot programs, potentially minority stakes in new businesses. And of course, not all of these are going to prove to be fruitful. We're going to have to start and stop these on a continuous basis until we find those that we think we can bring forward for profitability. Horizon 2 then are those emerging solutions coming out of Horizon 3. And now we're starting to increase the investment here. Some of them will become things that we can productionize. But again, some of the things as we start to explore and invest more, we'll have to stop and decommission. And of course, Horizon 1 really describes our current business activities. And what we'd like to do here is split these into 2 types, the ones we continue to invest in and the ones we simply maintain that we're extracting the value from. And finally, all organizations have a set of solutions that they're bringing to end of life. And that's what the retiring Horizon 0 describes. Just as a note, the size of the circles in each horizon are there just to indicate the size of the investment in each potential solution. Now, as well as articulating all the current work that is taking place, another critical role for the lean portfolio management team is also to be clear about defining a future state. And of course, they can use techniques such as a SWOT analysis to think about the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats to help them define potential options for where they want to take the portfolio. But one nice technique that we recommend is actually using that portfolio canvas as a way of exploring potential options in terms of the direction they want to take the portfolio. And you can see I've just put an example on this slide for an organization working in the education industry. Perhaps they want to make a big move to digital textbooks. Perhaps they're considering moving the portfolio to focus on new markets. Or perhaps actually there's an opportunity for them to focus on opening a bricks and mortar college. The idea here is that we use the portfolio canvas as a design thinking tool to help us evaluate these different options before using it again to define clearly a vision for where we want to take the portfolio in the future. And then, of course, that future state can be used to help define the epics that are going to build the new solutions to help take us there, or maybe iterate on the existing solutions. And we'll look at epics later and how we define them, but for now we can just be clear that they're the largest initiatives within the SAFE framework. So the last thing I just want to mention around alignment is to answer the question, how do we ultimately connect this strategy to execution? And of course, we do this through our program increment planning, our PI planning that takes place every 10 to 12 weeks, when we bring the entire ARC together, 125 people working in one of those potential value streams. And over 2 days, we start with management clearly setting the mission, minimal constraints in place, allowing the teams to build plans using all their knowledge and experience. And over the 2 days, through collaboration, new requirements are emerging, plans are being iterated upon, negotiations are taking place, and dependencies are being managed. And the critical thing about this event is really the acceleration that we provide in terms of some of the key stakeholder decisions. Ultimately, at the end of the 2 days, the teams have taken responsibility to create and commit to a set of plans that align with the strategy that's been laid out by the organization itself. We repeat this exercise every 10 to 12 weeks, which gives us the cadence needed to ensure we maintain that alignment, but also the ability to inspect and adapt as appropriate. Okay, so the second thing I want to look at is a critical aspect of business agility, which is really to think about innovation and fast feedback and the role that that plays in successful lean portfolio management. And if we think about some of the innovative solutions that organizations are developing, product development of any kind is inherently risky and has many uncertainties built into it. And sometimes this level of uncertainty causes some enterprises to avoid taking these risks, or perhaps when they do take the risks, they end up investing too much, building the wrong thing, or really not validating their assumptions to the level that they wish they could. So what we're going to look at now is really how SAFE addresses these challenges, how it manages the work, and how it allows us to generate the fast feedback needed. And the first step in this, of course, is to help visualize the work. Defining a portfolio Kanban, like the one we can see on this screen, really helps to put in place a lightweight process to support analysis, decision-making around the entire EPIC approval process. And it provides the transparency we need to really understand what is important for the business right now. It encourages collaboration through every stage of this process. And of course, the one on the slide is just an example, but if we go from left to right, the funnel is about accepting all new ideas. We don't put work in process constraints on this part of the portfolio Kanban. Really want to welcome ideas from all parts of the organization. But when we come to review these ideas, we certainly do want to be focusing our efforts. So we use weighted shortest job first, which is a prioritization process within SAFE to balance value and effort, to make sure that we're focusing on reviewing the things that are most important to the business And we're going to limit the amount of review that is taking place because we know it detracts from the work the team has to do on an ongoing basis. As we pull things into analysis, we'll also manage the amount of work we have in flight. And here we'll start developing a lightweight business case to provide slightly more analysis and understanding before we give that go or no-go decision. Now, the important part of this Kanban system that I want to focus on today is the implementation phase. And what you can see here that we're going to look at in more detail is that SAFe implements the lean startup cycle within this part of the process. Now, if we think about the lean startup cycle, a critical term taken from the book by Eric Ries is innovation accounting. And he talks about the innovation accounting framework consisting of 3 critical activities. We have the MVP, the minimal viable product, which is the smallest thing we can develop to get and generate some learning. It helps us to establish a baseline, to test our assumptions, to gather some objective metrics. And then we can either, based on that metrics, tune the engine, make some small adjustments to help us iterate towards our goals, or perhaps we make a decision about whether to pivot or persevere. Perhaps we need to decide whether to continue, to extract further value, or perhaps we need to stop and move on to something else. And in order to put this learning cycle in place and be able to make these decisions, we need to implement a feedback loop, what Eric Ries refers to as the build, measure, learn feedback cycle. And if we look at how we've applied this build, measure, learn to modeling epics, we can see how we're building in these opportunities to decide to whether to pivot or persevere. So what we have here is the epic beginning its journey by defining an MVP. And of course, in SAFe terms, incrementally delivering an epic is about dividing it into features. So for SAFe, we define an MVP, which is a small set of features that we can deliver in order to validate or invalidate our hypothesis. Once we've evaluated the MVP, we can then make that critical decision. Do we stop and move on to something else, or do we continue to extract the value? If we do decide to continue to extract the value, any additional features, of course, will need to be compared and prioritized against other features we may be working on at that particular time. Now, one important thing just to call out is, when does this learning take place? And within SAFe, we have 2 mechanisms to help support this learning. We drive down the batch sizes of features by ensuring they always fit within a PI. So we know the features themselves can never expand beyond that time box. And we also use a range of different milestones. In SAFe, we have 3 types of milestones. We have milestones at the end of each PI. We have milestones every time we deliver to our customers. And of course, we can put in place learning milestones, which act as a decision point to force us to make a decision about what direction to go in the future. Now, let's just think very briefly then about how we actually define our epics. And we use an epic hypothesis statement. This is a template which can be used to capture, organize, and communicate all the critical information about an epic. And I put an example on this slide you can see for an airline that's thinking about developing a website for purchasing tickets. And of course, this is a significant endeavor. Before attempting to design and build the entire epic, the epic hypothesis statement really helps us to develop a way that we're going to be able to test our assumptions and gain the knowledge quickly before we decide whether to make the full investment. So at the top of the statement, you see clearly defined who this new website is for. It's for their current airline members who want to purchase tickets. We describe what it is. It's a website that provides the ability to purchase, search, upgrade, and check in, and then some differentiation against one of our competitors. The important part is at the bottom half. Some very clear business outcomes have been specified. We think ticket sales will be moved to the new website. We think our call center volumes will be decreased. We think customers will gain a better experience. And then importantly, the leading indicators. How can we actually measure and test this hypothesis early and often? And here we put in some indicators around monitoring the call center activity and being able to increase purchases via the website. What we're trying to do here is move away from lagging indicators so we can validate quickly whether we're on the right path. And just one quick thing to say about some of these other indicators. The question often comes up, why don't we use traditional measures like ROI? And the real reason is due to the fact that they tend to be lagging. By the time we get the information in, often the decisions we've had to make and the time frame within which we need to make them have passed. It's also very difficult to connect ROI to particular features in the system. Some features will be large, some features will be smaller, and it's very difficult to understand which ones contribute in which manner to the overall ROI. And then finally, it often doesn't tell the story about flow. Sometimes we see that large jobs impede smaller jobs in the system, reducing their ROI. There may be something that incrementally delivers more value that we need to be working on at a particular time. And then, of course, sometimes if we're exploring new markets, the things and products we're providing may not even be monetized at this point. So returning to the example that we looked at, we can now see some data coming in. And the idea here is that we can use this data to actually validate or invalidate the EPIC hypothesis. We can see from the graph that we are getting increased visits to the website. We're getting more queries, shown by that green line on some of the flight schedules. But we need to correlate this with the call center traffic. And indeed, we can see that the blue and the orange lines are decreasing, which seems to demonstrate that our hypothesis is being validated. Just note, one thing we want to try and avoid also is the idea of vanity metrics. So vanity metrics are things that are very easy to measure: lines of code, velocity of the teams, number of test cases passed. And whilst these KPIs are very important, they really don't help us to validate or invalidate our hypothesis attached to the epics. So finally, just on this section, the decision then to persevere indicates that there's some benefit in continuing the work that we're doing. And we validated that through our leading indicators. If we decide that there's no importance or value to continue, then we pivot. But this decision to pivot is often so difficult that many companies fail to make it. And one of the reasons they do this, one of the reasons they continue to invest when the data might be to the contrary, is because of the money they've sunk in so far to the initiative. And it's important to note that innovation accounting as applied to SAFE doesn't consider the sunk costs or the money already invested. If we really want to be able to pivot without mercy or guilt, we've got to be able to avoid these sunk costs and have a funding model that removes the pressures, the expectations of having to spend all the money that's been allocated. And that's what we're going to look at briefly now to conclude our view of lean portfolio management. So let's do that. Let's just summarize by having a look at how the budgeting process within SAFE operates to really allow us this opportunity to pivot or persevere. And we're just going to start by contrasting this approach with a more traditional project-centered approach, where typically multiple cost centers are contributing to an overall budget. And what we see is that this approach brings a number of challenges. Obviously, it's complicated, it takes time. It may require a great number of cost centers to contribute and fund. It really drives the teams to make very fine-grained decisions early on, forcing them sometimes to break down and specify the entire project up front before we really have the knowledge that we need to be able to do that. And then, of course, we have the situation where people tend to be assigned to projects on a temporary basis. Once the project is complete, they go back, they get assigned to another project, and it hinders our ability to create our long-lived, high-performing teams. And of course, another thing it does is focus on utilization. It tends to aim at driving to 100% utilization, which we know in lean and agile leads to an economic disaster. Scope increases, more difficulty in forecasting, increases in time and cost. And then finally, as I mentioned briefly before, one of the real challenges with this approach is building high team performance. And we know that maintaining long-lived teams, giving them a chance to improve their processes, is how we reach the levels of high performance. And that becomes very difficult in this particular approach. Since the portfolio itself within SAFE is a collection of value streams, we now have the opportunity to fund these value streams directly. Lean portfolio management, of course, is still controlling the total spend and the allocation between the value streams. And of course, they're approving the largest initiatives that are being worked on. But once the money has been allocated to the value stream, it allows us to commit our people to these long-lived programs, decentralize some of the day-to-day budgeting decisions, and critically, it provides the flexibility we require to really ensure we're working on the most important initiatives. Now, one thing just to say briefly is, as we decentralize some of these decisions, we need to put in place some level of guardrails to make sure that the budgeting decisions and the way the money is spent is in line with the lean portfolio management expectations. And SAFE defines 4 guardrails. The first is guidance across the horizon solutions we looked at. The second is some guidance across capacity allocation in terms of technical and business spend. The third guardrail is really about putting in place an understanding of an approval threshold. At what point do we need to come back to the lean portfolio management team to approve these new initiatives? And the final guardrail, number 4, is really about reasserting the critical role that our business owners play on each agile release train in ensuring the money is allocated in a way that matches the goals of the organization. Now, one challenge this brings, though, is that most organizations will generate more good ideas than we can fund. And this really results in a portfolio prioritization challenge. And in this slide, you can see the 3 value streams on the left within the same portfolio all have a large number of desired solutions. We can't afford to fund all of these, so within SAFE, we use a participatory budgeting process as a technique for solving this challenge and agreeing upon collectively across the portfolio an optimized set of solutions. And this process enables the lean portfolio management team to collaborate with business owners and other stakeholders to really right-size the investments that we're making in each value stream. This process itself was first introduced in Brazil in the 80s, and it's generally used across countries worldwide to give their citizens an input into the spending of state funds. And the process is to run a workshop where we present to the attendees all the potential solutions represented by the epics and allow them to make decisions about how best to allocate the funds based on the value they think will be delivered. But since we can't fund everything, it drives participation and collaboration. And more importantly, participants from the different value streams have to collaborate to pool their budgets to support some of the largest initiatives. And what we're finding is that the discussions that come out of this collaboration really allow organizations to make better choices about the epics that they're going to implement to optimize the value delivery across the portfolio. So that concludes the overview I want to provide of how SAFE describes lean portfolio management. But before I hand over to Kevin, I'd just like to ask the attendees to use the poll that we've built into GoToWebinar. And you'll see when you look at that poll, there's 5 different dimensions, which are representing 5 levels of maturity from sit to crawl to walk to run to fly. Sit, we don't have a formal strategy in place. Crawl, we have some of the responsibilities defined. Walk, we're starting to use some of the prioritization methods and we manage epic flow effectively. Run would be that we're starting to apply lean agile budgeting. And then fly would really be that we're embracing all the things that we've mentioned so far in this webinar. So if I just ask the attendees to take a minute to please fill in the poll, and once we've done that, I'll let Alex show us the results. Thank you.
Certainly. I'll give everybody about 20, 30 seconds to reply here. Okay, I'm going to close the poll in 3, 2, 1. And we'll go ahead and we'll share the results up there if you'd like to discuss them, Andrew.
Yeah, thanks. Go ahead.
Yep.
Great. Can everyone see those now, Alex?
Yes.
Perfect. So yeah, I'm not going to say too much, but I'm just going to represent and read out a few things. So it looks just like a lot of people are recognizing themselves as sit. Quite a few, 37% at crawl, and a few at fly, which is incredibly encouraging. One thing I will say just in summary is we've been running these polls over large groups of organizations. We did it at the summit early this year. And the picture we're seeing here is very representative of what we're seeing globally. And perhaps this is a great point for me to pass over to Kevin, who's now going to give us some practical guidance as to how we can improve these levels of maturity.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Can everybody see my screen now? Alex,
Yes, I can.
check? Okay. So thank you very much, Andrew, for the talk about SAFe, how SAFe looks at lean portfolio management from a perspective of strategy and execution. Today I will show you. I will go with you through a case I picked up where they started their agile transformation back in November 2017, and it's a mid-sized mortgage servicer. It is a small IT department and around 400 to 500 people in total, including the business, where they were lacking around, okay, guys, we are in a service provider, a BPO organization, looking for some structure in realizing value to the customers. In that sense, those were more or less the starting point of our adventure at this typical company. And one of the main problems is that they had completely no alignment between teams and portfolio, and they have this structure where project managers were running around with Gantt charts. Similar cases we did with larger organizations in finance and also some other service organizations. But today I want to walk you through most of the steps we did in with this typical company. Looking at what was really the problem when we entered there in November 2017, where they originally launched their agile transformation. It was team-based, so locally they have dedicated team areas focusing on how to get the process rolling. But short after that, it was quite clear that the overhauling structure around those teams were more or less trying to figure out how traditional project management was working with an agile way of working. There was no overview or no uniformity in realizing projects. They still called it quite projects. There was no clear priorities next to the thing that we still call HIPPO, so highest person's opinion, highest paid person opinion, or just the one who screams the loudest. So not really a uniform way of how to prioritize. They already had, because if you look at SAFe and what Andrew told us, they had the role, or more or less was a function already in place, called business owner, who are representative or responsible for a certain business line, not really products, but they had this typical role in place already. But the problem here was they were siloed. They were not working together. They were working only on their own goals and perspectives. And they had the typical demand and supply model. So a big basket of analysts with a few teams, but completely disconnected from each other. And lastly, it was full of lots of wishful thinking in terms of realizing deadlines. So you can imagine we have some compliance regulation projects, but also clients who wanted to have some kind of new features and processes in place. But in terms of deadlines, it was based on demand. So analysts trying to figure out, okay, how can we solve this puzzle without connecting or talking with teams? They come up with deadlines which most of the time were too strict and too close to to even have quality products at the end. So there was, like, if I would say 5 typical problems which was at hand at this typical company, it would be these 5. And remember that it's located. They have this supply teams or agile teams working in IT locally on site, but they had a supplier who was working really doing the developing side of the work. So there was also a challenge. But I will talk about that later on this presentation. So what did we do? 3 things mainly. We restructured the portfolio operations, including the WIP limits, where Andy was talking about. I have an example of the actual portfolio Kanban we presented, or we started to implement. Secondly, we trained the business owners in working together and prioritization on the single business goals instead of their own specific goals. And thirdly, we hosted the PI planning to sync portfolio with the team plans. So especially what Andy was talking about, okay, you have on one hand your business strategy. You want to have some kind of flow on portfolio level with the largest initiatives, but then the next challenge comes, how do we actually start working with them? So we also use the PI planning as a method to bring them into one synchronized endeavor. So on the right side, the actual picture on there is our portfolio wall, including the team walls next to it. So the blue card will be the teams, and the yellowish cards will be the portfolio layer with the different columns. And the thing is, we implemented this in a so-called OBEA room, like a war room for the organization, where in one instance, the management team or anyone who's interested in how's the organization is going can walk in the room. And the best OBEA rooms, war rooms, is self-explanatory. And in one instance, all of the walls tell you where are we in the process, what are we doing, what are we achieving. So this is one of the portfolio wall in this typical room. Well, looking at, we restructured the portfolio operations with the work in process limits. Firstly, we actually talked what Safe says about the they suggested about the typical Kanban. We just started working with them. Their previous portfolio operations was more or less one basket full of everything. Big, small, interesting, high value, low value, complex, simple projects, started, not started, etc., etc., etc. And we started first, okay, that was like the first instant, okay, what are we doing now? Filtering out the current situation, the future situation, and the situation which are already passed. So projects which are still continuing but already dead. Projects which are finished but still for somewhat not really finished, to filter those out and see, okay, what do we get here? We took all of the main stakeholders in the organization. So looking at the business owners, the teams, the product owners especially, but also business analysts, to see, okay, guys, what can we do in order to structurize our approach better and dealing with demand much better? So we have the same kind of idea. So the funnel, the thing was that we explained about the OBEA room to the whole of the organization, meaning that everybody which has a good idea about where are we taking the strategy further in terms of projects or ideas or initiatives or epics, they can post a sticky note and paste it on the funnel column and see afterwards, okay, is this something which brings us further to our vision, or something that's really a good idea but maybe later, or nothing at all. But more or less it's like an entry area for the organization or people inside the organization to be really transparent, and if you have a great idea, come in and share with us. If an idea is really picked for picked for implementation or analysis, is being shifted to review, where business analysts and some product owners and maybe some developers figuring out, okay, what kind of idea is this and is it really worth it? Andy talks about the epic hypothesis statement. You can use that. It's very good because it forces you to really get to the point on what you want to achieve. We adapted a little bit. So we used the epic hypothesis statement as a starting point, and they used the quick scan. They have a template for it right now. It's a little bit more details about specific context of the organization, but they help them, but still get to the point kind of idea on this format. So after that, if it's still okay, and the business owner says, yeah, this, an organization still says, okay, yeah, this brings us further to the vision. It enters the analysis phase, and there we break down Epic into features and more or less maybe some starter stories to actually go to implementation phase. Make it ready for your next PI event to make it sure that everybody gets it, to know what to do and what kind of acceptance criteria are more or less inclined with it. Once that's done, we still have a go-no-go area. So this is more or less your investment. Your investment effort on this analysis phase is really specific, because you can still on the last side, if it's analysis and it's still not worth it, you can break it down and say, okay, well, dump it and start with a new epic, or move it to the backlog, where it's a potential epic to be implemented in the next few PIs. All right, so this is the thing. On top of that, we have the funnel. It's an infinited symbol. That means that, I mean, there can be like 100 ideas there. No bother, because no effort or investment is done over there. We have the two WIP limits, 4 and 4, meaning we first just counted the heads. So we have 4 or 5, then it was 5 or 6 business analysts working on initiatives, taking the role as epic owner in picking up ideas. but more or less into the coming the months past, and we figured out, okay, less is more in that sense, because it was not really aligned to the working process on team level. So we made it 4-4. So maximum 4 initiatives in review, maximum 4 initiatives on analysis. And even you can even discuss or debate about how do you want to have a WIP limit on your backlog. That's a good question. I would say think about it if you're interested in what is the purpose of doing WIP limits on the backlog. I have my own opinion, but maybe we can discuss it later on. So next thing we did is to train the business owners in prioritization. As I told you, there's like 4 or 5 business owners: sales, IT, product management, business intelligence, business operations, etc., working on their own, like silos. Were mining on their own kind of idea, own targets. The organizational wide business goals were not really interested. I mean, they were interested, but not for a personal level, for the business owners in that sense. So we took them through a few workshops, not only the business owner but also the executive, to make sure what is the biggest value we're after, what is the horizon we are looking at, and how can we work together that we are still, I mean, the business owners as we are, generating business and making sure that we are profitable in the future. But in terms of looking at the same thing, the same horizon, how can we help each other to prioritize? So that was like the basic start. And to help them prioritize in terms of a method or process, we used the method weighted shortest job first. So the abbreviation is WSJF. It's a technique from SAFe where you can start. Where you can use to prioritize features and epics on a portfolio level. We use that as a method or as a technique to start discussion. Okay, what are the levels we wanted to have to prioritize? And on the lower side, the image you see is the actual result of this discussion. So they have a adjusted prioritization technique. I wanted to translate this, but still it's quite in Dutch. So for the Dutch viewers, it's readable. Otherwise, I can send you later with a translation. No worries. To have a little bit of an inspiration. Okay, how did they do it? And basically, the sum on the right side, the scoring tells you what of a relative prioritization is this. Oh yeah, one more thing. Before the process limits were in place, they had like 30 to 40 plus items in progress, more or less. We're never gonna know for sure. But after it was a maximum of 20 items all over the lane. So from the beginning to the end, it was 20 items max in terms of initiatives. So lastly, one of the things we did is hosting a PI planning session. So the first one is the first initiative, the first PI. There was a picture of taking that with one of the last days with the confidence vote. The PI really binds your portfolio to the teams, to their operations, to your implementation efforts. It gives focus, it gives more quality, higher quality. It gives a perfect overview of how everything is going. Also with dependency management, because you know how it works. We know sometimes how if we are not visualizing how it all works with dependencies. If you visualize it, it becomes more clear. And that's just exactly the thing we showed here. I have another picture on the next slide. See you how it works with the program board and dependency management. Our organization also continues in sync because every 12 weeks or 10 to 12 weeks, we hosted this. They are still hosting this PI event right now. Actually, they finished their second day yesterday at a PI number 5 already. So there's a continued process which they use. So before the first PI, what do you do? Well, they already had the foundational level or the process in place about how do you work with Scrum. But now in terms of how do you work with Scrum in terms of enterprise and SAFe, we train them all in like a kickstart with SAFe for Teams to make them understand what is their role on team level, but also what is their role towards portfolio management and towards the entire organization. And another tip, we hosted the first PI on an external location due to focus on planning. It actually works because then the second PI they did was in their internal organization. Yeah, and there was quite a much distraction in that sense. So it makes more sense to make it here. So what was the result? New portfolio operations cost flow of value. Deadlines were more realistic and more focused on organizational goals, because now we're working as a team to bring initiative from A to B, instead of yeah, how many people can I harvest for my project, and they keep running around hoping that they will finish the deadline. So what are we doing now? They start looking for a value stream organization entirely. So not only IT, but also the complete business operations to one value stream, continuous delivery value. So that's like an experimental phase. They seek to embed suppliers more into the delivery process, because they have this very harsh external dependency, to see how can we onboard them, or in any case, how can include them in the process instead of that it's still an external supplier. And they are sort of IT for IT initiatives like test automation and a more enhanced platform, so they can more autonomously support or launch features. That was a story. So I have a little bit of an idea of, okay, what did we do? Similar project we do with Quint in other areas of business, but also with other clients. As we can see, what can we do for you? Basically, we can help you bring you back in control over your agile delivery process by structuring your portfolio, or maybe portfolios, depending on the size. Connecting your enterprise strategy to your daily execution with agile teams. Generating a vision and roadmap. So in expectation management with the external clients make more sense. What can they expect when, approximately, and how do you communicate with that? Also in between. Understanding how value flows and how to manage it. So through your organization, how do you organize in such a way that it's less handles and more fluently? In practice, what can you expect? Well, we take you and your team through a set of workshops to define the current and future state of your portfolio. We can create a portfolio flow which connects you to your business, similar to the one I presented, or another one, depending on the context and the roles you work with. We also create a clear role and responsibilities, because that was also one of the problems, that so many different roles and responsibilities doing the same thing, no overview and stuff. So what we did is having clear role and responsibilities, also inclined to phases in the portfolio, made more sense to them, and also more predictability in the process. And lastly, we can coach you and your team on how to bring your portfolio further down the line, and also maybe to see, okay, how can we actually act as a value stream organization in terms of continuous delivery. So one of the things we also do is training. So we have a large academy with lots of training. In terms of SAFe, we have the following scheduled. So if you want to know more in detail about, okay, I have an idea about agile portfolio management or lean portfolio management in terms of SAFe, and this is an inspiration to you, and you want to have more to implementation phase, do visit one of the upcoming trainings. For instance, leading SAFe is a more in-depth view of how do you go with lean portfolio management, or maybe SAFe product manager, product owner, as a way to connect both worlds to your portfolio management. You can find more on our website, quintgroup.com/training, to see more information and how you can register. Alex, I think we are at the end, and we have time for some questions, if there are any questions.
Indeed, we do have a couple of questions, and we'll jump right into the first one here, which is, what kind of challenges are you seeing with organizations that are looking to implement LPM, Lean Portfolio Management?
Yeah. Well, the thing is that normally it's quite disconnected. So we have like or we have a very structured portfolio process, or quite unclear realization phase, implementing stage, so with the teams. And the challenge is to make the connection between both worlds. So how do we work make sense, but the demand comes in, the question comes in from the market or inside, or compliance, whatever. And how can we break it down in such a way that it's still agile, and make the teams make it so that it makes sense for the teams to start working with it. So that's like one of the challenges. How do you make the connection, and when? What is the role of the teams in your portfolio, and vice versa? But also the role of in this terms was the business owners, because they have like 5 to 6 business owners who are steered or expected to generate business on certain areas. That's like how they did. But the thing is that how do you make that into one team, and how do you connect it to your business strategy to actually, because if you have the process, I can tell you, if the process of the portfolio management, just what Annie was talking about and what I was talking about, if that's in place, just the process, it looks great, but it doesn't really work, because it's all about the input and output and people working together. So that's like one of the biggest challenges two of the biggest challenges I see in implementing lean portfolio management.
Yeah, okay. Maybe I can just add a few things. I completely agree with what Kevin said. In terms of some of the things we see when people start to implement these new practices, I think one of the early challenges is just how much work is in flight across the portfolio. And things like the portfolio Kanban, the WIP limits, using the epic hypothesis statement as a disciplined and consistent way to capture what is happening is a really great first step. It kind of gets everything under control. And then I think the biggest challenge that we see, or one of the pieces that is most challenging to organizations, is that budgeting approach. It's very easy, of course, to talk about it and to have aspirations of moving away from a project-based approach to funding. But if we're not able to put that into practice, then we often are forced to continue in our current ways of working in terms of defining everything up front, continuously moving people around from one project to another, focusing on things like utilization, and really not getting the benefits of this pivot or persevere, this agile mindset that we talked about during the slides.
Great, okay. Good addition.
And in the nature of time, guys, we're going to have one last question here today before we wrap up, and that is, what frequency is it recommended that lean portfolio management teams meet?
Yeah. Should I jump in first on this one, Kevin, and then you can add something afterwards? So, in terms of SAFE, we talk about a portfolio sync meeting. That's really the mechanism by which this happens. And generally, this is occurring every couple of weeks. And the purpose of this meeting is to look across and discuss items in the three main areas of responsibility: the strategy and investment, so looking at MVPs, approving new initiatives, operations, are we coordinating and executing across the portfolio successfully, and then governance in terms of metrics and making adjustments to our budgets. But one pattern I am seeing more and more these days is to separate a more strategic meeting, perhaps the strategy and the governance piece, to take place less frequently, and then to have the operational meeting on this more frequent 2-week cadence. So we're able to keep supporting execution, removing impediments, and then perhaps once a month, we're taking a look at the strategy, the investment decisions, and the governance.
Right. So what? Just a quick on the question. It was like, what is the frequency recommended to the portfolio team meet, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So we in this instance with the case I just explained to you, it was like every week. So they have this old PMOs or portfolio management team who was working on old school project in terms of more traditional timeline. And what they did is like we meet every Thursday to talk about what are the new priorities, what is currently in place on analysis phase, and are we looking at in terms of realizing the value, or we needed help there or clarification. So every week is like a resync on the portfolio and team level where this team was connecting. In our place, the lean portfolio management team was not only the business owner, portfolio manager, and maybe some architect, but also the product owners, to have the whole organization in terms of value connected into one meeting. So that actually worked.
Okay. Thank you both for your excellent answers and excellent presentation. So I think we're going to go ahead and wrap up today. I want to thank everybody for joining. Feel free to reach out to us either at quintgroup.com or to Andrew with Scaled Agile at scaledagile.com. And I know they would both be happy to talk with you about SAFE if you have any additional questions or anything that comes to mind after this webinar. Again, hope the rest of your day is fantastic. Thanks again for joining, everybody. Goodbye.